My daughter calls me every Sunday morning at exactly 8 o'clock and asks the same question. Dad, have you gone through Mom's things yet? Every week without fail. Same time, same words, the same careful pause before she speaks, like she's been rehearsing the call on the drive to church. If I say no, she sighs and moves on to safer ground, asking about my blood pressure or whether I've been eating right. If I say yes, even partially, her voice sharpens into something I don't recognize, and she wants to know exactly what I found, which boxes I opened, which drawers I went through. Last Sunday, for the first time in 14 months of grief, I lied to my daughter. I told her I'd gone through everything. She was standing at my front door 40 minutes later, and what I discovered in the hours that followed tore apart everything I thought I knew about the family I had spent 40 years building. If you're listening to this tonight, go ahead and tell me what time it is and where you are, because after what I'm about to share, you may not want to be sitting alone either. The November sky over the Texas hill country was the color of a bruise the morning all of this began. I was sitting in the kitchen of the house Dorothy and I had shared for 31 years. A 2-story limestone place on 12 acres outside of Kerrville that we'd bought when the kids were still small enough to fit in the cab of a pickup together. The cedar trees were losing nothing, because cedar trees never do, but the live oaks had gone amber and rust, and the light through the window hit Dorothy's old coffee mug on the counter the same way it always had, like it was still waiting for her to pick it up. She'd been gone 14 months, pancreatic cancer, the doctors said, fast and merciless, the way that particular cruelty tends to be. 6 weeks from diagnosis to the end, which is barely enough time to say goodbye properly, let alone to understand what you're losing. Dorothy had been the kind of woman who kept everything in order, who balanced the books for our small landscaping business down to the penny, who remembered every birthday and anniversary without writing a single one down. When she died, she took a lot of knowledge with her. I was still finding out exactly how much. The phone rang at 8 sharp. Dad. My daughter's voice was warm but careful, the way it always was on these Sunday calls. She was 41 years old, a high school vice principal in San Antonio, and she had inherited her mother's precision about time. How are you feeling? Getting by, I said, which was the honest answer. There was the pause. I had learned to hear it coming. That small silence where she gathered herself before the real question. Have you gone through Mom's things yet? The study, I mean. Her files and paperwork. I looked down the hallway toward the room where Dorothy had kept her desk, her filing cabinet, the small cedar chest she'd brought from her parents' house in Lubbock when we first got married. The door had been closed since the week after the funeral. I hadn't been able to open it. Some doors, once you open them, stay open, and I wasn't ready for what that one meant. Not yet, I said. She sighed. Dad, it's been over a year. You really should. There could be important financial documents in there. Insurance things. You know how organized Mom was. I know how organized she was, I said quietly. I was married to her for 40 years. She softened. I know, Dad. I'm sorry. I just worry. We talked for another 10 minutes about her son's soccer tournament and whether I was planning to drive down for Thanksgiving. When we hung up, I sat with my cold coffee and thought about the pattern of those calls. 14 Sundays in a row. Always the same question. Always Dorothy's study. Always focused on the paperwork. I thought about it for the rest of the week. The following Sunday, when the phone rang at 8 o'clock, something made me hesitate before I answered. A feeling I hadn't had since my years working construction sites. Reading the way a structure sits before you trust your weight to it. Something was off about the angle. Something didn't add up. Dad, have you gone through Mom's things yet? This time I said yes. Oh. A beat of silence that was completely different from her usual size, tighter, compressed, the sound of someone recalibrating quickly. What did you find? All sorts of things, I said, which was technically true, since I'd found nothing, which is still something. Dad, her voice had changed. Did you find anything in her files? In the cabinet by the window? I went through quite a bit, I said carefully. Another silence. I'm going to come up this week. I've been meaning to visit anyway. She appeared at my front door 40 minutes later. 40 minutes. San Antonio to Kerrville is an hour and a half in good traffic. She had been in Kerrville already. She had been close enough to drive here in 40 minutes, and she had never mentioned it. My son-in-law Marcus was with her. He stood on my porch in a pressed weekend shirt with his hands in his pockets and his smile pulled a little too wide, the way smiles look when someone has rehearsed them in a car mirror. I'd always had a complicated feeling about Marcus. He was the kind of man who spoke in smooth sentences that sounded like answers until you thought about them later and realized they hadn't actually said anything. Dad. My daughter hugged me, and I could feel the tension in her arms. We thought we'd surprise you. You did, I said. They came inside and immediately moved toward Dorothy's study with the practiced ease of people who had thought through the route in advance. My daughter suggested I make coffee while she and Marcus looked through some of the paperwork just to help organize things. It was a kind offer, delivered in a bright voice that didn't match her eyes. I'll come help, I said. Something flashed across Marcus's face, too fast to name. Let us handle it, Dad. You've been carrying enough. It's my wife's study, I said. I'll help. The three of us stood in that small room together, and I watched them watch me go through Dorothy's desk. They were looking for something specific. I could feel it the way you feel weather coming in, a pressure change, an alertness in the air. Every time I opened a drawer, Marcus shifted his weight. Every time I lifted a file folder, my daughter held her breath. After 20 minutes, my daughter's phone rang. She stepped into the hallway to answer it, and I heard her voice drop to something low and urgent. Marcus stayed in the room with me, filling the silence with talk about the Longhorn season, about deer hunting, about nothing. I didn't find anything unusual that day. But that night, lying awake in the house that echoed with Dorothy's absence, I understood that the search wasn't over. It had just changed direction. The call came 3 days later from a man named Gerald Whitmore, a CPA in San Antonio whose name I didn't recognize. He apologized for reaching out directly and explained that he had been trying to contact me for several months. He had represented Dorothy in some private financial matters, he said, and she had left specific instructions with him about what to do if she passed before certain things were resolved. What kind of financial matters? I said. The kind your wife wanted to make sure you understood before anyone else had the chance to reframe them for you. He paused. Mr. Calloway, I need you to know that your son-in-law has visited my office twice in the past 2 months claiming to act on your behalf. I don't believe he was acting on your behalf. The kitchen floor seemed to tilt slightly beneath my feet. What has Marcus been doing? I asked. I think you need to see the documents your wife left before I answer that, Gerald said. But I want you to understand something first. What's in those documents involves your business, your retirement accounts, and the last 4 years of transactions through Calloway Landscape and Design. Your wife found something that troubled her deeply. She spent 8 months documenting it before she got sick. Dorothy had been the bookkeeper for our business since we started it in 1991. Even after she handed off the day-to-day operations to our accountant, she still checked the books herself every quarter, the way some people check on sleeping children even when they know everything is fine. It was habit, and it was love. And apparently at some point, it had become something else entirely. I drove to San Antonio the following morning without telling anyone. Gerald Whitmore's office was a plain 2-room suite above a dry cleaner on the north side of the city. He was a small man in his 60s, with reading glasses pushed up on his head, and the kind of handshake that means something. Dorothy came to me 18 months ago, he said, setting a manila folder on the desk between us. She'd been auditing the business accounts herself and found irregularities going back 4 years. Invoices for subcontractors that didn't exist. Equipment purchases for equipment that was never delivered. Payroll entries for 3 employees who, as far as she could tell, had never worked a single day. I stared at the pages he slid across to me. Numbers, dates, account transfers. Dorothy's handwriting in the margins. Neat and precise and furious. How much? I said. Over the 4-year period she documented, approximately $340,000 was moved out of the operating accounts into a series of shell companies. Gerald removed his glasses from his head and set them on the desk. The shell companies trace back to a holding entity that Marcus incorporated in Delaware 4.5 years ago. My son-in-law had been stealing from our business for 4 years, and Dorothy had found out. She didn't tell me, I said. It came out quieter than I intended. She was protecting you, Gerald said gently. And she was protecting your daughter. She believed that if she confronted Marcus directly without sufficient legal documentation, he would find a way to destroy the evidence and position her as the confused older woman making accusations. She wanted to build an airtight case first. but she got sick. 6 weeks after she came to me the second time with what she called the final piece of evidence. Yes. Gerald's voice was careful and even. I want to be clear that I can't make any accusations, but I want you to know that Dorothy herself expressed concerns, in writing, about the fact that her diagnosis came so suddenly and progressed so rapidly. The room contracted. My heart did something irregular. She thought. She hoped she was wrong, Gerald said. She asked me to make a record of her concern and to contact you if anything prevented her from doing so herself. She trusted you to know what to do with that information. I sat with that for a long moment. Outside, a truck downshifted on the street. Somewhere, a door opened and closed. Dorothy had spent the last months of her life building a case to protect me from our own family, and she had done it quietly, alone, without burdening me, because that was exactly the kind of woman she was, and I had loved her for it for 40 years, without understanding the full weight of what it cost her. Where's the evidence? I asked. The copies are here, Gerald said, patting the folder. The originals, Dorothy told me, are somewhere on your property. She said you would know where to look when the time came. He looked at me steadily. She said you'd taken her to the spot for every anniversary you could remember. The anniversary. 30 years ago, on our 10th, I had built Dorothy a small stone bench at the edge of the property, at the top of the slope overlooking the creek, under the big live oak that had been there before our house, before the road, probably before the county itself. We'd sat on that bench every anniversary since. It was where she'd told me she was pregnant with our daughter. It was where we'd sat the night we paid off the mortgage. It was the last place I'd taken her in the wheelchair before she became too weak to leave the bedroom. I knew where to look. I didn't go home right away. I drove to the county library and sat in the parking lot and thought about the shape of what I was dealing with. Marcus had been stealing from me for 4 years. My daughter had been calling every week to check whether I'd found the evidence. Whether she was doing that willingly or under pressure, I didn't yet know. And that uncertainty was the thing I could least afford to get wrong. I thought about her voice on those Sunday calls, the practiced warmth and the careful questions. I thought about the way she'd looked in Dorothy's study, not calculating the way Marcus was, but frightened, like someone watching a situation unfold that she couldn't stop. I called Gerald from the parking lot and asked him to contact the Kerr County Sheriff's Office and the Texas Rangers Financial Crimes Division. I asked him to send copies of everything he had. Then I drove home by a different route, one that looped around the back of my property, and I parked on the county road and walked in through the cedar brake on foot. The stone bench was where it had always been. The live oak overhead was bigger than I remembered. Or maybe grief just makes everything look different. I brought a hand trowel from the equipment shed, and I found the metal lockbox 14 inches down, right where the bench's left foot had been reset into the ground 15 years ago at Dorothy's insistence. She'd made me re-level it because the ground had shifted. I understood now that re-leveling hadn't been the only reason. Inside the box were 3 things: a thumb drive, a handwritten ledger, 60 pages in Dorothy's methodical script, and a letter addressed to me in her handwriting, sealed in a plastic sandwich bag to protect it from the ground. I opened the letter there on the slope, with the creek running below me and the late afternoon light going gold through the oak branches. Harold, she had written, if you're reading this, I wasn't able to tell you myself, and I'm sorry for that more than anything. I found what Marcus was doing 2 years into it, and I spent 2 years more making sure I had enough to stop him completely. I know what you're going to think, that I should have told you the moment I found out. But I know you, Harold. You would have confronted him directly, and he would have destroyed everything and taken our daughter with him into whatever story he invented to explain it. I needed time. I needed proof. I needed it to be undeniable. I don't know what happened to me. I want to believe it was just bad luck. But Marcus knew I was closing in. He saw me copying files the week before my diagnosis. I watched his face when the doctor called with the results. And Harold, I need you to know that I saw relief there. I saw relief on my son-in-law's face when my doctor said I had 6 weeks to live. Please be careful. Please let someone official handle this. Don't face him alone. Our daughter is not a bad person. She knows something is wrong, but not what, and she is afraid of him in ways she hasn't told us. Help her. That's all I ask. The evidence on that drive and in that ledger is enough to put him away for a long time. Gerald has copies. You have the originals. Use them. I love you. I love this bench. I love this whole stubborn life we built together. Dorothy, I sat on that bench until the sun was nearly gone. Then I heard the sound of a car on my driveway and 2 doors closing. I picked up the lockbox and walked back toward the house through the cedar trees. They were on the porch when I came around the side. Marcus saw me first, and his expression went through 3 things in 1 second: surprise, calculation, and then the professional warmth he kept for situations he intended to control. My daughter was beside him, and she looked the way she had looked on Dorothy's bench at the funeral, like someone holding themselves together by will alone. "Dad, there you are." Her voice was thin. "We called and you didn't answer." "I was in the yard," I said, keeping the lockbox at my side. The cedar trees were behind me and the porch light was in their eyes. Wanted some air. Marcus's gaze had dropped to the box. Something moved behind his eyes, quick and cold. "What's that?" "Old lockbox," I said. "Found it out by the creek." "What's in it?" "Old memories," I said. "Come inside. I want to talk to both of you." We sat in the living room, the same room where Dorothy and I had watched our daughter take her first steps, where we'd hung Christmas stockings on the mantel for 30 years. Marcus sat forward in the armchair with his forearms on his knees. My daughter sat on the couch with her hands folded tight in her lap. I set the lockbox on the coffee table. "I talked to Gerald Whitmore today," I said. The blood left Marcus's face so visibly that it looked like something physical had been removed. My daughter made a small sound. "He explained what Dorothy found," I said, "and what you've been doing for the past 4 years, and what you've been looking for in Dorothy's study every Sunday that I reported progress." "Dad," my daughter started. "Let me finish." I looked at Marcus directly, the way I'd learned to look at men who were trying to make me doubt what I could see with my own eyes. Dorothy left documentation, a ledger, a thumb drive, and a letter. Gerald Whitmore has copies. I have originals. The Kerr County Sheriff and the Texas Rangers Financial Crimes Unit have been contacted as of this afternoon. Marcus stood up. The professional warmth was completely gone, and what replaced it was something I recognized from Dorothy's letter. The face of a man calculating odds. "This is a misunderstanding," he said. "Whatever Dorothy thought she found, she wasn't well at the end. Her judgment was, don't." My voice came out harder than I expected, hard enough that he stopped. "Don't you say a word about her judgment. Dorothy's judgment was the clearest thing in this family. You knew that, which is why you were afraid of what she'd found." My daughter was crying now, quietly, without trying to stop it. "I didn't know what he was doing," she said. "I knew something was wrong. He told me you were getting confused, that you'd been making decisions that didn't make sense, that we needed to watch out for you. I thought I was protecting you. I thought," she pressed her hand over her mouth for a moment. "He told me Mom's files might have things that would embarrass the family, that it would be better if we dealt with them privately before anyone else saw them. So you called every Sunday to see if I'd gone through them," I said. "I was scared, Dad." She looked at me with Dorothy's eyes, and I believed her completely. I thought I was helping. Marcus took 2 steps toward the door. I had expected this. "I wouldn't," I said. "The driveway's being watched." He turned. "You're bluffing." The knock at the front door was 3 sharp raps, official and unhurried. Marcus looked at the door. He looked at me. He looked at the door again. He sat back down. The investigation took 4 months. Marcus had been running the shell company scheme since the first year of our daughter's marriage, long before anyone had given him any reason to distrust them, which told you something about the kind of person he was at his center. The $340,000 Dorothy had documented was the conservative figure. By the time the Rangers finished their audit, the actual total was closer to $500,000. He had been patient and systematic and confident that no one would ever look closely enough. He had not counted on Dorothy. The question of what had happened to Dorothy was the one that hurt the most to sit with. The Rangers brought in a specialist from the state medical examiner's office to review her records. The diagnosis had been legitimate. The cancer had been real. But there were questions about her treatment, about a medication protocol that had been slightly altered by a prescription adjustment that Marcus, who had driven her to several of her later appointments, had been present for. Whether it was coincidence or something deliberate, the investigators said, was something they could not prove beyond a reasonable doubt. Not enough for a charge. Enough to know, in the hollow center of your chest, what kind of man you had let into your family. Marcus pleaded guilty to wire fraud and embezzlement before the trial date. He received 7 years and would be required to make full restitution. His attorney tried to argue that my advanced age and diminished financial understanding had made me an easy target, which was the most insulting thing anyone had said to me in 63 years of life, and which the judge appeared to find equally unimpressive. My daughter filed for divorce the week after the guilty plea. The harder thing, in some ways, was what came after the legal part. My daughter and I sat at Dorothy's kitchen table a lot that winter. She had moved into the guest room while her apartment situation sorted itself out, and we spent evenings the way grieving people do, not always talking, sometimes just existing in the same space while the coffee grew cold. She had a great deal to feel guilty about. I had a great deal to forgive. Neither of those things happened on a schedule. I should have questioned him more, she said one night. When he started talking about you losing your edge, getting forgetful. I wanted to believe it wasn't true, but I also let myself believe it a little, because it explained why the business numbers seemed off and made it easier to point the finger somewhere else. She looked at me steadily, the way Dorothy used to look at hard things. That's not an excuse. That's just what happened. Your mother thought someone was easier to manipulate when they were desperate to explain something they didn't understand, I said. Marcus gave you an explanation for something that was confusing you. It was the wrong explanation, but it fit the available information. He'd had 4 years of practice. You're being too generous. Probably, I said. I reserve the right to be less generous next month. She laughed, and it was the first real laugh I'd heard from her in a long time, and it sounded like her mother's laugh, and it hurt and healed simultaneously in the particular way that only grief and love together can manage. Gerald Whitmore helped me conduct a full audit of the business and rebuild the financial records from scratch. The restitution payments, when they began, went into a separate account. We used part of it to restore what had been taken from the operating fund, and part of it to set up something Dorothy would have approved of deeply, a financial literacy program through the county library, free for anyone who wanted to understand how to read a business balance sheet and recognize when something wasn't adding up. Dorothy had understood that knowledge was the only real protection. She had spent 2 years building hers carefully and quietly, and she had left it for me in a lockbox under a bench at the place that meant the most to us. The best thing I could do with that gift was make sure other people had access to the same kind of tools. My daughter calls me on Sunday mornings still, 8 o'clock, same as always. But the question is different now. She asks how I slept, whether I've been out to the bench recently, whether I need anything from the grocery store on her way up. Small questions, ordinary questions, the kind that means someone is thinking about you without needing anything from you in return. That's what love sounds like when it's working the way it should. I went to the bench last Sunday, first time since I dug up the lockbox. The live oak was the same. The creek below was running clear after a week of rain. I sat there for a long while and let myself miss Dorothy the way I'd been trying not to, fully and without managing it. She had spent her last clear-headed months protecting me. She had documented every transaction, written every date, preserved every piece of evidence with the same methodical care she'd brought to 30 years of bookkeeping, and she had buried it where only I would think to look, in the place where we had sat together for every anniversary and watched the creek move through the cedar breaks. I am 63 years old. I have learned more in the past 14 months than I learned in the decade before it, about the cost of quiet courage, about what someone who loves you will do to protect you without ever asking for credit, about the difference between the people who stand beside you when things are easy and the ones who stay when staying is genuinely hard. My daughter was manipulated. She made choices I wish she hadn't made. She also chose, when she understood what had actually happened, to sit at her mother's kitchen table with her father through a cold winter and do the slow, unglamorous work of putting trust back together piece by piece. That is not a small thing. That is, in fact, the whole thing. Dorothy used to say that she had 2 tests for whether something was real. Did it hold up under pressure, and did it improve you to be near it? Our marriage had passed both tests every time I thought to apply them. My daughter is passing them now. That is enough for me. More than enough. The phone rang last Sunday at 8 sharp. I picked it up on the first ring. How'd you sleep, Dad? Well enough, I said. How are you? Better, she said. Getting better. Outside, the live oaks were beginning to bud green at the ends of their branches, the slow, reliable insistence of spring coming back to the hill country the way it always does, without fanfare, without anyone having to ask. Some things you can count on. Some people, when you give them the chance and the time, turn out to be those things. I am learning to believe in both again. Dorothy would have told me I was taking too long to get there, and she would have been right, which is one of the many reasons I loved her for 40 years and will love her for whatever comes after. If this story reached you tonight, do me a favor. Think about the people in your life who show up without being asked. The ones who do the quiet, unflashy work of love. Tell them you see it. Don't wait until you're reading a letter that was buried under a bench for 2 years to understand what they were giving you. I know that now. I wish I had known it sooner. If this story moved you, I hope you'll share it with someone who needs to hear that the truth has a way of surviving, even when people work very hard to bury it. Subscribe to the channel if you want more stories like this one. And tell me in the comments, what would you do if you discovered your family had been keeping something this big from you? I'd really like to know.